Hey everyone, my name is Sean, and in today's video I'm going to be bringing you my true Draco deck profile. This is a deck that carried me towards Platinum 1 in this game, and I absolutely love it to bits. So we are going to start off with breaking the deck down into its categories, and we're first going to look at the starters that I used in this deck. In my build, I used 14 starters. This is a really good number to have, as it means I have about a 90% chance of opening in my opening hand with at least one of these cards. Now, in True Draco, you kind of want to dig through your deck so that you can kind of find the cards that you need in order to set up your board when you're going first, or find the right cards in order to break your opponent's board when going second. And so we have 14 cards here, beginning with Terraforming, 3 copies of Card of Demise, 3 copies of Into the Void, 3 copies of Pot of Duality, 3 copies of Pantheism of the Monarchs, and 1 copy of Draconic Diagram. Draconic Diagram is your main and your most important starter for True Dracos, and it allows you to destroy a card on the field in order to add another True Draco card from your deck and then add it to your hand. Destroying cards on your field will normally be a downside, but there are ways to circumvent that downside in a True Draco deck. As Draconic Diagram is a field spell, we are of course playing Terraforming, and then for draw power in our deck, we're doing 3 copies of Card of Demise. This card is insane for control based decks, as it allows you to draw until you have 3 cards in your hand. So if you have 0 cards in your hand when you use this, you get to draw 3 cards. Now, for the rest of the turn, your opponent will take no damage, and during the end phase of your turn, you must send your whole entire hand to the graveyard. Also, you cannot special summon during a turn you activate this card, so there's a lot of downsides. But True Dracos do not care about any of these downsides, as they do not focus on special summoning at all, nor do they care about having their hand sent to the graveyard, because they're going to set a lot of their cards on the field as interruptions during their opponent's turn, or use them immediately as soon as they draw them. Also, in regards to damage, you can always attack and do your damage first with this card, and then use this card in main phase 2, so that you do not have to worry about the downside of this card whatsoever. What complements Card of Demise really well is Into the Void, and this card says if you have 3 or more cards in your hand, draw 1 card, and then during the end phase of the turn you must discard your whole entire hand. Again, very similar to Card of Demise, but with them both stacking against each other and be your main strategy to put cards on the field is not really too much of a downside for a deck like this. Another card that's stacked with Card of Demise is Pot of Duality. Pot of Duality makes it so that you cannot special summon during the turn that you activate this card. However, you do get to excavate the top 3 cards of your deck and add one of them to your hand. Very, very powerful effect. Very, very good card you want to pick up right now, in case if you want to look at some future decks coming out to the game. This card is going to be played a lot more in the future, so if you do have it around or you want to pick it up now, it will play a lot of value for you in True Dracos. The final draw power card we have in this deck is Pantheism of the Monarchs. Pantheism of the Monarchs says send 1 Monarch spell or trap card from your hand to the graveyard to draw 2 cards. This is really good. It allows you to bait out interruptions such as Ash Blossom and Joyous Spring, so that if your opponent negates that, then you can hit them with the Card of Demise and carry on your plays from there. So it is a really good threat to have. If they don't stop it, then you get to draw 2 cards, and this card then functions as an extender in the graveyard. So let's move on to that part now, and let's talk about what the extenders are in True Draco. The extenders in True Draco that I use are quite a lot. Actually, we had 21 extenders in this deck, and let's start off with Pantheism, as what we just talked about. Pantheism, when it is in the graveyard, says you can banish this card from your graveyard to reveal 3 Monarch spell and trap cards. Your opponent chooses 1 for you to add to the deck, add to your hand, and the rest gets shuffled back into your deck. This card allows you to fuel your hand with more resources. It's great for going second, because you can go and get a card like Strike of the Monarchs or the Monarch Stormforth. And for going first, you can get a card like the Monarch's Erupt to kind of set up an interruption during your opponent's turn. It can also search out itself, so you can get more copies of Pantheism with this card, and if your opponent chooses to add them to your hand, then that's more draw power for you to use. What's great about this card also is that it has a once per turn clause for the effect, but that only applies to the extender effect. The starter effect is not once per turn, so if you draw into multiple copies of Pantheism, you can use them immediately, assuming you have a Monarch card in your hand to send from your hand to the graveyard. The rest of the extenders are True Draco cards, so let's start off with the 8 monsters we have here. We have double Majesty Maiden, 3 Ignis Heat, and 3 Dynamite Knight, the True Draco Warrior. Now, or True Draco Fighter, my apologies. Now, all of these cards are very similar in that they all say to tribute summon this card, you contribute a continuous spell and trap card you control instead of a monster. It is what makes this deck work so well because you don't have to worry about having a card on the field before you could do a tribute summon. You could just put a spell and trap card on the field and do that instead. Now, these all functions as extenders because of their second effect. When a card or effect is activated while Majesty Maiden is on the field, you can add a True Draco monster from your deck to your hand. When Ignis Heat is on the field, you can add or activate a True Draco continuous spell card from your deck or activate it directly to your field. And Dynamite Knight does the same, but for trap cards instead. So these cards all allow you to go plus because anytime your opponent uses an effect, you get to add, once per turn when your opponent gets to add uses an effect, you get a free card from your deck. What is important about these cards is that they're not hard once per turns. So if you have multiple copies of Ignis Heat on the field, for example, they each will be able to give you a free card if your opponent activates multiple effects during their turn. So keep that in mind. Having multiple copies of the same card on the field isn't a downside because they all are treated separately for their effect. The spell and trap cards for True Dracos are very wordy and very loaded with lots of effects, but for now let's just talk about the extender effect. True Draco Heritage and Disciples of the True Draco Phoenix are both continuous spells which say immediately during your main phase you can immediately after this effect resolves tribute summon one True Draco or True King monster face up. So this is how you can summon multiple monsters to the field without actually using a special summon because these cards grant you extra tribute summons, and because you can use continuous spell cards or trap cards as fodder for it, you don't have to worry about having a monster on the field already to do a tribute summon. Their other extender effect is the first effect in their text. Heritage's extender effect says during your main phase, you can draw cards equal to the number of True Draco and True King card types, monster spell and trap card sent from the field to the graveyard this turn. Because you're going to be using your spell and trap cards as tribute materials in order to summon out your monsters, and you can use your monsters as well, it is very likely you're going to have multiple cards sent to the graveyard during each turn. And therefore this card rewards you for doing so by giving you some draw power. With this card you can technically draw up to 3 cards if you send one each of a monster, spell and trap card from your field to the graveyard. Disciples of the True Draco Phoenix allows you to recycle your cards. You can target 3 True Draco or True King cards in your graveyard, shuffle them into your deck and then draw 1 card. It is really powerful for that, and it allows you to loop your resources almost infinitely, so this deck never really has to worry about decking out. So it is a great way to loop your resources and a great way to manage your cards and put them back in your deck so that you can then search them out again with your monsters. Then we have the trap cards, and the trap cards both have a similar extender effect in that during your opponent's main phase, you can immediately do a tribute summon. That's really important to keep in mind because whilst your spell cards allow you to do that during your turn, your trap cards allow you to do it during your opponent's turn, which is important to disrupt your opponent's plays and say do a tribute summon and a tribute over one of your cards to do one of their removal based effects. True King's Return also works as an extender because its unique effect says you can target 1 True Draco or True King monster in your graveyard and special summon it in defense position. While you don't really want to special summon very often in True Dracos, doing it during your opponent's turn isn't a problem because all of the cards that say you can't special summon are mostly spells, and therefore you're not going to be doing them during your opponent's turn anyway, so it doesn't really matter. Now, moving on from there, these cards do have one more effect, and these cards also function as another category, and that is removal. What's great about these True Draco cards is they give you a lot of value for the few amount of cards that you have. So all of the True Draco spell and trap cards work as removal. The spell cards when sent from the field to the graveyard can destroy and target 1 spell and trap card on the field, whereas the trap cards can do the same but for a monster on the field. This is really good, especially if you they allow you to get a lot of free value off your tribute summons. So normally you'll be going neg because you're getting rid of 1 card to do a tribute summon, but then you're going to balance it out or break even with your opponent because you can technically destroy one of their cards after you've done your tribute summon. Furthermore, of course, as I said earlier, your monsters then can extend further, so you can then go plus, and then essentially you're getting free cards by getting rid of your older cards. So it is very, very cost effective, and these are your main ways for getting rid of cards on the field. Now, other than that, let's also look at what protection effects we have in this deck, and there's still quite a few bits of protection effect or defensive cards in True Dracos. And so we have 10 cards that allow you to be protected in here. And so let's start off with the field spell Draconic Diagram. Draconic Diagram gives all your monsters 300 attack and defense. And also, the first time a tribute summoned in True Draco monster will be destroyed by battle each turn, it is not destroyed. A lot of people forget about that effect, so it is really good to have around because it can catch a lot of people off guard. Then our cards here can also work defensively because you can tribute summon during your opponent's turn over your trap cards, and then they will pop one of your opponent's monsters during their turn. It can be really good for interrupting their plays. Say if they're going to do an XE summon, you can get rid of one of the cards and therefore they won't be able to have enough cards on the field to do an XE summon, or whatever the scenario is, you can destroy one of their cards. True Draco Apocalypse also has a very good defensive effect, and that is you can target one other True Draco or True King card on the field and you control and destroy it. Now, if you do, the attack and defense of all face-up monsters your opponent controls becomes half of their current attack and defense. This is really good, and this is how True Dracos get around the bigger monsters in the game, because this is a non-targeted effect that reduces your opponent's monster's attack, and then you can attack over them, and a monster would have to be over at least 25,000 attack in order for this to not allow you to be over them. So that's not going to happen too often. So this card is really, really good, and what's great about Apocalypse is that you can do it in the damage step, so that your opponent has fewer opportunities to respond to this effect, and you can destroy their monster in the process because they won't be able to retract their attack. Now, True Draco is a deck which is very, very reliant on having spell and trap cards in the field, and there are a lot of cards that threaten people that like to put spell and trap cards in the field. Things like Harpy Feather Duster, Lightning Storm, Imperial Order, and so on and so forth. Other cards, Double A Zeus is also a card that really a lot of people like to nuke the board with, and so you want some negates in order to protect you from those situations, and they do happen quite often enough for these cards to be the main deck. The first card that we have here to protect your board is Solemn Judgment, the ultimate Omni Negate. Any monster will be summoned or a spell or trap card will be either activated, pay half your life points to say no, none of that please. It is very, very powerful, just a lot less effective when you're going second, and but it's still very, very powerful nonetheless once it is set up, and you can just pretty much guarantee that you're going to negate anything your opponent throws at you. Another card that is also really good and surprisingly a low rarity card is Strike of the Monarchs. This card says you contribute one face-up level 5 or higher normal summoned or set monster, then target one face-up card on the field and negate its effect, then draw one card. This can negate pretty much anything that's on the field, whether it's a Lightning Storm or a Zeus. As long as it's on the field, you can use this card to negate. And you break even with this card, which is really, really nice because you're losing 2 cards by tributing one monster and also playing this spell card, but then you're negating one of your opponent's cards, so they lose that card, and then you get to draw a card for your troubles as well, so it breaks even overall. So it is a very cost-effective card and very, very powerful kind of quick negate to have. Moving on, I will now talk about win conditions for True Dracos. Win conditions are cards that essentially, as it says, win you the game. Now, in True Dracos, there really isn't a win condition. This is a grindy style deck where you're trying to essentially out-resource your opponent with your resources, destroy their cards, get rid of their threats, and then continuing going plus in the long run so they can't out-grind you. But if we have to choose one card to be our win condition, it's definitely going to be the Monarch's Erupt. The Monarch's Erupt is a skill drain that does not apply to tribute summon monsters, and so it is really, really good for crippling a lot of opponents because a lot of people do not tribute summon in the modern day age of Yu-Gi-Oh! Only decks like True Dracos and Monarchs, surprisingly enough, will actually do tribute summons, and so most people cannot deal with this threat. This card will destroy itself during the end phase if you do not control a no tribute summon monster, but what a lot of people don't seem to realize is that this is during your end phase. So a lot of people try to destroy your monsters and hope in during their end phase that this card will commit suicide. that won't happen at all. This card will destroy itself during your end phase only, and you have plenty enough time to get another tribute summon monster on the field before that kind of wears off. This card is very, very powerful, but in order to use this card, you must have no cards in your extra deck, which is why True Dracos work the way they do. And with us having gone through all the categories, we can now tie this all together and now have a look at the deck list as a whole. Now, I would say for the most part, this deck list is completed. This is, like I said, the deck list that got me to Platinum 1, although there are a couple of things I will add, and I'll talk about what those are a little bit later on. But here is the deck list, and let's quickly go over the cards. 2 copies of Majesty Maiden, 3 copies of Ignis Heat, 3 copies of Dynamite Knight, 1 copy of Terraforming, 3 Card of the Demise, 3 Into the Void, 3 Pot of Duality, 3 Pantheism of the Monarchs, 1 Draconic Diagram, 3 True Draco Heritage, 3 Disciples, and 2 Strike on the Monarchs. Then for traps, we have 3 Solemn Judgment, 3 Erupt, 1 Return, and 3 Apocalypse. And that is the deck in a nutshell. This deck is really cool because it is kind of budget friendly. It does have a lot of super rares. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, plus 10. So it has 16 super rares, so that is kind of expensive. But there are really no ultra rares other than Terraforming in this deck. And also Solemn Judgment as well, actually, that's 4. So alright, this deck isn't that cheap, but it's cheap in compared to a lot of decks because it does not require the use of an extra deck. And that can be where the costs really add up for a lot of decks, especially because most extra deck based decks use a variety of different cards from so many different packs. So your odds of having them all is very, very low. Well, not very, very low, but low enough where you've got to spend a considerable amount in order to complete them. So True Dracos is a really, really good deck to pick up if you want to kind of learn the meta and play it in ranked. But this is not the only way to play True Dracos. And in order to be a good player at True Dracos, you need to understand the tech cards that you can use. Because being able to play True Dracos effectively requires that you are able to analyze the meta and work out which cards are most effective for the kind of decks you're expecting to face against. So let's kind of run through some of the tech cards that I would recommend here. I'm not going to go into them in too much detail, but I'm going to quickly kind of gloss over them. This deck can play other monsters that are not True Dracos. You can play Planet Pathfinder to search out field spells if you're playing more than one type of field spell. You can play Amano Iwato, which is a fantastic card for going second when your opponent has set up a board because it shuts down all monster effects while it is on the field. It is very similar in style to Dark Rooted or more, or Forbidden Droplets, or probably some other cards I'm missing out here. But it is just an instant negate. Your opponent can't even use hand traps while Amano Iwato is on the field. While this does hinder you, it does stop your monsters from going off. It's not so bad because it gives you the opportunity to get rid of your opponent's threat before you add this card back to your hand, because it's a spirit monster and it will turn off. And then during your turn, your monsters will be live again. The opposite of Amano Iwato, which is good for going second, is Inspector Border, which is a great card for going first. This card says neither player can use monster effects until a Ritual, Fusion, Synchro, Xyz, Pendulum, or Link monster is on the field. And even then, you can only activate one for as many different types of those cards are on the field. So if there's only 2 Link monsters in the field, both players can only activate one monster effect. If there's a Ritual and a Fusion on the field, both players can activate 2 monster effects. So this is a really, really good card to have because it hinders a lot of decks quite sufficiently, and a lot of decks just cannot play while this card is out. You summon this card out and your opponent is playing Tri-Brigade, they pretty much automatically lose, where their only option is to summon out Nerval, send it to the graveyard for Almirage, and then Almirage will trigger it, Nerval will go off, and boom, they've used their one effect. They're not getting anything else out for the rest of that turn. So Inspector Border is very, very powerful to have around. It is a bit restrictive, but once you get around its effects and you understand how to play it, this card is really, really good. Another monster which can be used going second is the Ring Dragon and Ra Spear mode. It's like a kaiju, but it is a normal summon kaiju, but it will contribute over 3 of your opponent's monsters, so it helps you to break your board without, say, using a destruction effect or effect that can be negated. Then we have Ansha Malfrate. I always find this card difficult to say. But Ansha Malfrate is a really cool card because it's used a lot in the TCG where we don't have a lot of our draw power cards that we do in Master Duel. But in this version of the game, we have those cards, so we don't really need this card. But you can try it nonetheless. It's a pendulum card which can destroy itself if you have no cards in your extra deck except Ansha Malfrate, and then when it is destroyed you can draw one card. So it is a really kind of cool card, and then you can summon it to the field from your extra deck directly to the field. So it gives you a way of putting a monster on the board that you can then tribute summon over, or just an 1800 beater. Of course it does special summon, so it clashes with Card of Demise or Pot of Duality. But in the TCG where Card of Demise is limited to 1, that's probably not going to hurt you too much, so you can afford to do a couple of special summons. Now, there are other draw cards you can use in the game for True Dracos. You can play Upstart Goblin in this deck quite easily, Pot of Desires, Pot of Extravagance, and Pot of Prosperity. Be aware with these two cards that they clash with Heritage and Draco Phoenix because they stop you from drawing via effects for the rest of the turn. But if you really need that draw power, they're here as options. And then we've got field spells such as Domain and Chicken Game that can work in this deck. And then we have, I think, other extenders in the form of Waterfall of Dragon Souls. And then the rest of the cards are essentially just kind of floodgate style cards, powerful continuous spells and powerful continuous traps that really hinder your opponent. So let's quickly run through them. Kaiser Colosseum limits how many monsters your opponent can summon, does the same thing as Summon Limit almost in a way. Dimensional Fissure forces cards to be banished, along with, say, like Macrocosmos and Summoning Cursed. The Monarch Stormforth is great because it can allow you to tribute over your opponent's monsters. Cosmic is a way of getting rid of spell and trap cards by banishing them instead of destroying them, which is always good. Forbidden Droplet is great for going second, but it's also good because it can trigger your Heritage, your Disciples of the Draco Phoenix, your True King's Return, and your True Draco's Apocalypse, because it sends them from the field to the graveyard. So you get to get all the benefits of Droplets, plus then you get to pop cards in the field. We have a Waterfall of Dragon Souls, which is to search out monsters from your deck. Metaverse is a field spell searcher. And then Solemn Strike. Solemn Strike is really good in True Dracos. Is often more used in True Dracos than Judgment. But in Master Duel, I think Judgments is just a little bit better and a little bit safer to run. But this card is really good going second for breaking boards, unlike Judgment. So you can set it and then during your opponent's turn negate one of their monster effects, which is really powerful. Imperial Order is good here sometimes, as long as you can get rid of it so you can use your spells. Anti-Spell Fragrance can hinder your opponent. Skill Train is really good in this deck. Summon Limit again. Goals and Match is okay. I wouldn't play it in the current format. Vanity's Emptiness is good, but you won't be able to keep this card on the field for very long because you send cards to the graveyard quite a lot and you want to send cards to the graveyard. The other drain cards can also be good. Soul Drain is good because True Dracos have no natural way of dealing with cards in the graveyard. And Mind Drain does the same for the hand. And then we have Lose One Turn, which is a continuous trap card that says that during the turn a monster was special summoned, it is turned to defense and its effect will be negated. So it is really powerful to use against your opponents and doesn't really hurt your deck that much. And then we have There Can Be Only One, a card which I really wish I had for my main deck. I don't have it right now, and I'm not going to buy it just yet because I don't really need it. But it is a very powerful card, as it restricts players to having only one type of monster. And just thinking out loud, Drytron, yep. Eldritch in a way, not really. Trizu, yep. There are many decks which run multiple copies of the same type of monster, so There Can Be Only One is very effective in the current format to use against many decks. So I really wish I had copies of that. Now, if you are someone who is looking for a more budget version of the deck, then you can absolutely play budget True Dracos, and in case you don't want to spend all that good money on it and you just want to test this deck out, or you don't have a lot of resources to spend. Here's an example of a budget build for True Dracos. It sacrifices a lot of the draw power, and it sacrifices multiple copies of Dynamite Knight for more copies of the lower rarity cards, but it's still functional nonetheless. So for a budget version, I would run 3 of the lower rarity card monsters instead of 3 Dynamite Knight to save on super rare resources. Then I think you have to play Card of Demise in order to get the value of this deck, so I definitely would have that. And same with Pot of Duality. Draconic Diagram is definitely a must-have, but then we run cards that are like what I've just basically said, good floodgate cards. Things like Dimensional Fissure are cheap, Summoning Curse is cheap, Strike of the Monarchs is cheap, and then instead of doing Solemn Judgment, you can do cheap cards like Magic Jammer or Divine Wrath. They're very, very good negates, but they require you to discard, so they're not as cost efficient as they pay in your life points, but they're still very, very much achievable. And then most of the deck is still the same. You are likely to brick more with this deck because you don't have so many ways to kind of access or have so much access to starters in this deck. You could run Ansha Malphite as well to have more draw power, I guess, as well. That would definitely be a way to get a bit more draw power for this deck. But in a nutshell, you could definitely run True Dracos as a budget deck, and it will work. It will at least definitely work for what you're investing into. So now, that is in a nutshell my True Draco deck profile. True Dracos are a deck that I really, really like. I think they're very, very fun to play. I think they're very, very rewarding to play. And hopefully you guys have enjoyed this video. And if you want, I will upload some gameplay of me playing some True Dracos and show you exactly how to play this deck by using some in action. But this video has definitely been long enough as it is, so hopefully you found useful at this profile. Please subscribe to the channel, and I will see you soon. Take care.